Hey Julian, how you going?
Pretty good. How are you, Ben?
Oh, I'm all right.
Thanks for debating me tonight. I really appreciate it.
Oh, that's all good. It's always a good time to have a debate. All right, so do you wanna kick us off?
Sure. So, I've been debating this over the past year, obviously, and the more that I debate it, the more convinced I am that a two-state solution is impossible. I believe that a one-state solution is a more probable outcome. It's not a one-state solution, as in like a my state solution, right? Right, which obviously that's racist, and either way that goes would be a problem. I hope anyone who's watching this would realize that. And the reason that I say this, and it's not new, but John Kerry left office saying that a two-state solution was no longer possible. And if that weren't bad enough, of course, now you have Donald Trump in office, who took a lot of heat when he debated as a candidate because he said he believed in a two-state solution, and all the other candidates grilled him for it. But now that he's in office, through the Haley Doctrine, he not only agrees with John Kerry that a two-state solution is not possible. He said this publicly. That's his policy. It's not possible. It is one state. It looks like one state. So that's the policy that they're set forth with the Haley Doctrine. Um, so all this, and the more that I debate this, it makes me wonder what I'm really debating about. Because how do we get to peace? Because I know that you and I we've talked about how there's these two narratives that go nowhere. So how do you get to peace? I think you have to identify the problem here is it's settler colonialism. It's colonialism that has been all the way back from the 1800s, and that's the real problem that we're facing here and that we're debating. And it just gets worse and worse because it's not like the 1960s anymore. So it's Plan B, and we can't look for an equality of outcome, even though it's steps, so it really wouldn't be an equality of outcome. But dividing the land and this settler colonialism is a problem in the first place. So if Israel is going to be a democracy, it would need. What I'm saying is that right now the population from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, it's basically split half and half between the Jewish population and Arab population. There's some in betweens, but over time, by 2030, and it's an overpopulated area to begin with. But over time, by 2030, because the population is expanding more than anywhere else, eventually the Arabs would still have an outcome where they were between the Jordan and the river. There were more Arabs, than a larger Arab population than a Jewish population. And what they want to achieve, what the outcome here, what that they want, is a 75% Jewish population. And there's also actually, so there's three solutions. There's one state, there's two states, which is the one, which was really the problem in the first place, just the division of the land. But there's actually an outcome. I don't know I guess it was the my state solution, where they would just push the Palestinians out, which of course that isn't likely, but it's actually possible. There is a treaty or something. I can't remember what it is exactly, but they have stated that they're willing to do that, to drive all the Palestinians out of the West Bank. So I'll go ahead and listen to the counter arguments, but that's basically the case. That where we're at right now, we're not going anywhere, and we just have to look at it as one state and go to Plan B. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, okay. Look, I am of the counter opinion that actually a two-state solution is inevitable. And the reason for that is that it's about something you pointed to earlier, where you said that at the end of the day, Israel wants a 75% Jewish state. Now, the reason which a two-state solution is currently stumbled, if you will, because as you probably know, Israel has offered in the past to go back to like certain borders which were drawn at the various Camp David Accords. But the thing which really always is the sticking point is the right of return, which is that Palestinian Arabs want the ability to go to Jerusalem, to visit various holy sites, and things like that. But the problem is that the Israelis, if they allow the Palestinian Arabs to live in Jerusalem, and for them to be Israeli citizens, then it means that the voting won't work in their favor. Because as you noted, right, like the Palestinian Arabs have the numbers. So I think the reason why a one-state solution will never work is because the Palestinian Arabs outnumber the Jews. So what that means is that the Israeli state will cease to be a Jewish state, and I don't think any of the Jewish parties are interested in that at all. Like nobody in Israel currently wants that, because then Israel cease to be a Jewish state. It would just be like a mixed race state where the Jews are the minority. So they'll never tolerate a one-state solution. I think what's likely to happen is that either the Palestinians will give up on the idea of living in Jerusalem as citizens. Like maybe there'll be some sort of agreement where it's like a UN administered zone. Like if I was to make a solution, right, I would say that Jerusalem should just be like a UN administrated zone where the people living there aren't citizens of either nation, but there is like a facilitated ability to visit. So like you'd have that, and then you would just have the Palestinians govern possibly the Gaza Strip and the area west of the West Bank. Although, to be honest, I'm not overly opposed to maybe the Gaza Strip has been swallowed up into Egypt, because like Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood aren't that far away politically from each other. But that's not really a make or break. And then Israel will just continue to govern Israel. And so I reckon, for example, if Israel was guaranteed that the right of return would no longer be like a thing which the Palestinians are willing to die for, then they'd settle on winding back a bunch of the settlements and settle on the previously agreed upon borders. But from my perspective, it's really all about the numbers game, because Israel, as you acknowledged, wants to be the majority population in their own democracy, and they will not tolerate not being that, which means a one-state solution is off the table unless, as you kind of mentioned earlier, they're going to drive out literally every single Palestinian Arab from the entire of the West Bank, and that just seems like basically a diplomatic nightmare for them. The casualties would be huge. It wouldn't do anything for their reputation. Like Israel's entire thing is that we're the victim. Like that we're the ones being attacked. So to go on the offensive would be crazy, and they've kind of already done that a little bit, and they've already wound it back. Like when they took then they took a bunch of Egypt and they took the Golan Heights, and they really weren't interested. They gave all that land back, because a lot of the land, as you probably know, west of the West Bank, it's not the greatest land ever, and so I think they're happy with what they've got. They just really want Jerusalem. And they want to be a majority, and so that's Jerusalem is really the sticking point. But I'll hear your thoughts on
that. Obviously, we both agree that the problem that the people are criticizing and that we're debating is that Israel wants to be a Jewish state. I don't think anyone who supports Israel is going to disagree with me on that, except for people on the left in Israel, because they don't agree on it. Which brings me to my first counter argument. If there were two states, there would be a civil war on both ends, because the Israelis are just as divided as anyone. And obviously the Palestinians are just more divided, because they're split between the West Bank and Gaza. They have two different governments. They don't have a government that works together. So that could really create a lot of problems. I mean, and of course, if history repeats itself in 1948, so that was a problem to begin with. There's no easy solution here. Two states should be the solution, but it's causing all this conflict. So and two states also, it takes the narrative away from the fact that it is an apartheid state, and it does function as one state, because it's a military occupation and blockade. And one of the reasons that I think they would have a civil war is because they want a lot more than Jerusalem. Of course, they want Jerusalem, but the outcome that they want for Jerusalem is to destroy the holy sites. The UN was supposed to be in control of it. They never let the UN take control. They killed, in 1949, they killed the person from the UN, the first person they sent there to try to change that. They killed him. So that's probably not going to happen. And I'm not saying that there would be a forced withdrawal. Like I said, it's not a my state solution. Of course, when you talked about the outcome of the '67 war, they actually only gave back. Yes, they gave. It's not land that anyone would want. The Sinai Peninsula. Jimmy Carter negotiated for Egypt to get that back, but they actually just this past year annexed the Golan Heights. So they just annexed the Golan Heights, and as far as not wanting to live there, it's beautiful. I mean, if it wasn't a war zone, I would want to live there. So I think two states it would cause a civil war, and especially because Israel's actually moving right. I mean, there's leftists who feel the same way about all this that I do because I've met them before I live in Israel, but they are moving further right, and they do have Netanyahu in power. We do have Donald Trump in power. We do have the Haley Doctrine. So we are experiencing one state, and we need to look at this and as a way of pointing out what it's about, and what these criticisms are about. And when we expect this equality of outcome, it just gives, not that it's a real equality of outcome, I know that, but it just gives people like Ben Shapiro ammo to go after this, and so I don't know. That's enough.
Yeah, look, I think that you said a few things, which I just want to touch on. One of the things you said is that there will always be division in both Israel and Palestine because there are two different governments in Palestine, and Israel is like divided. But I actually don't think that this is necessarily a reason for instability. So for example, with Israel, they have different political parties, yes, but like so do all democracies. Do you know what I mean? Like the US, for example, has an extremely divided political system, but you guys aren't at war with each other. And similarly for Palestine, yes, they have different governments between the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, but there are other nations which do this. So for example, the US, Alaska is not and Hawaii aren't land bordered with the rest of the states, and often have different governorships with wildly different political persuasions. Like Hawaii's quite reliably Democratic, and Alaska's quite reliably Republican. Similar, I think there's a nation in the Middle East. The name is, I think it's Amman. It's the one which is around that Qatar area, which also has a separated land border. And so there's nothing in principle wrong with that, because you can just, as long as it's peacetime, you can just sort it out in a democracy. The problem for Israel and Palestine really is, and like for the Ben Shapiro crew, if you will, it's just the attacks, right? As long as there are violent attacks, then there'll be the idea that, oh well, look, we've been attacked, so we're just acting in self-defense. Everything's in self-defense. And also, you mentioned the settlements earlier. Like the Palestinians, for example, have laws which prevent their citizens from selling land to Jewish buyers, right? And so in theory, what that should do is it should stop settlements from occurring within the West Bank, because if everyone respected the law, then why would they sell? But because it's wartime, in a sense, right? Like and because still there isn't an agreement being reached, there's a lot of Palestinians who just don't see why they should follow those laws, right? Because it's like, well, why should I follow the laws of people who are, perpetuating this, this conflict forever? And it's like, it's a lot of money, it's a very attractive option to be bought out. So, but in theory, right? Like if you just settle the conflict down and agree upon the Jerusalem problem, then I see no reason why Palestinians will cease to follow their own laws. Like if they know where their borders are and they're allowed to visit Jerusalem, then there's no longer, and there's not a war going on, there's no longer an incentive to sell to the Jewish people, right? Because they'd be happy with where they are. And likewise, if the Israelis know that they have their Jewish state and that they have access to Jerusalem too, then there's also no incentive for for them to break the law, because then they are the aggressor. And that's like where the Shapiro crew like gets all of its narrative from, right? Is the idea that Israel is the one doing everything right, because technically all of their actions are legal, right? So the only if there's a peacetime, if there's a two-state solution, then Israel won't likely breach it, because then it paints them in a bad light. They seem like the ones who are aggressing. Yeah, and to maintain, and just to go back quickly, I maintain that the two-state solution is inevitable, because Israel, as we both agree, wants to be a Jewish state, and the only way they can do that is to make sure that the Palestinian Arabs are not citizens. So having Palestinian Arabs in Israel as it grows out, for example, is a no-go for them, right? That's why they don't want those outlying territories in part of the country, because there's a lot of people in them who outnumber the Jewish population, and so it'll destroy the notion of a Jewish state. But yeah, I'll toss it back to you.
I'll just go through your contentions as you stated them. It started by saying that different political bodies, that's not something that's going to create a civil war, because obviously we have different political bodies in the U.S. where there was a civil war that people would argue over, of course. But the thing is that they're not going to have a civil war over their political differences. They're going to have a civil war over if they believe that Israel should be a democracy or not, or if Israel should continue to expand its borders. Sorry, what were you saying there?
It's not about like, hang on. Like a civil war is when everyone's in the one state and fighting each other. If it's two states, why would the Palestinians have a civil war with each other?
You're kind of lost with it, but I mean they're divided. But there's the PLO and Hamas and so forth and so on. Is what I'm saying.
But the question is, so a civil war is when people who are living in the same state are fighting each other. Why would Fatah and Hamas fight with each other if there were just two states? Like, what's the incentive?
Well, it's kind of one state at the same time, though, isn't it? Because the UN, I mean, if they have any recognition at the UN, it's as one state. It's as one state, not two states, right?
Well, I mean, yes and no. Like for example,
it wasn't created as to be that way, was it? In the first place, was it? It's not part of the petition plan.
Yeah, so the petition plan is to create it to be two states, and in many ways, it is functionally two states, right? Like, so for example, Israel does not govern the Gaza Strip, and it doesn't govern the PLO. So
they have a military occupation there. Let me go ahead and contend to your points, and then of course I'll allow you to rebut. So I don't know. I know I've shown you this map, and then they have over 90% of control. I don't know if I've ever shown you this one, and I'll post this one. This is the West Bank outside of East Jerusalem.
Yeah,
it's completely blocked off. That's why John Kerry said that a two-state solution wouldn't be possible. So they want a lot more than Jerusalem. They want all the land, and that's the policy that they actually have, because they are continuing to occupy the Golan Heights, and they are continuing to occupy parts of Lebanon, and they are continuing to occupy the borders into Jordan, and they are continuing to occupy the borders into Egypt. They want more than that. There's a war going on in Syria. Everyone knows that. They're funding that. They have a plan for greater Israel. Netanyahu has his own plan that he wrote in the 1990s. I can show you both of those. These are actual documents. I can show you at the conference I went to, a congressman, I heard him say this twice. He said it at both conferences I went to. He walked into Ariel Sharon's office, and there was a map of greater Israel in the office. So basically what I was trying to say, though, but going back to the first point, is that it's not colonial. The difference between all these things, Hamas and the PLO and the differences between Israelis who they actually have their population is actually very divided. This is something I learned from studying for the debate, that they actually have a secular population. And I should have guessed this because I know I've actually talked to a lot of artists who live in Tel Aviv, and so they have the very secular. It's very secular in Tel Aviv and actually in Jerusalem, but in the more rural areas, that's actually where more the right we'll just call them the right. People who are more religious would have more typical views that you would put on the right. They live in those more rural areas. So the problem is colonialism, and that's the problem that the Israeli society would agree with. And I when I say civil war, I really think more of their society than the Palestinian one, because most of the Palestinians, the Palestinians they don't have, the majority of the Palestinians have a problem with armed resistance, but then it's a slight majority though, it's 65%. And I have a problem with armed resistance, but the thing is, when you look at numbers, it's how nice you ask the question. So 18% of Israelis actually believe, that you ask them, will there ever be a two-state solution? Only 18% of Israelis actually believe that. And they're having, as I suggested, they are not only going into these areas, but the outcome they want, is, we agree, is to have an ethnic majority. So they're popping out kids as fast as can be. That's on both sides, but they're trying to, they want to make sure that they hit that number. So they're doing that, and it's really something that was eventually it's only going to get worse, especially because this is actually, you could actually point to this as an experiment that proves that the effects of overpopulation are real, because they only have enough agriculture to feed 55% of the people that live there as is, and they've developed all this technology, that all as far as agricultural technology, they developed the greatest technology. They still can only feed 55% of their people. So the problem is colonialism, and we need to look at it as colonialism, and we need to look at it as it's not that it's not being, the goal isn't to be a democracy. It can be a democracy, and that is the incentive that Palestinians have.
Okay. So hang on. I thought, so when you say colonialism, you're clearly talking about Israel, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you reckon the Palestinians don't want to be a democracy?
I don't know what they want. We can't assume that there's an outcome any better than the outcome that we would want in our own culture. So we would want it to be. Well, what I mean by that is that, yeah, if it were one state, it would be a democracy. It's two states.
So okay, I think the first thing I want to touch on is that you say at some points, like, look, Israel really wants more than they're letting on. And to be honest, I just think in the confines of a debate, there's not really much we can do to prove either side. Like, for example, I would just point to, look, they had a lot of territory like Sinai and and the Golan Heights, and they gave it back. And I could say there are like obvious geopolitical ramifications for just rolling it the West Bank.
Golan Heights back.
So
they never gave the Golan Heights back.
No, they absolutely did.
They just annexed it. I'll put that in the notes. They just annexed it.
Yeah, well, the Israelis don't call the Golan Heights part of Israel, and the Syrian government thinks that it's not part of Israel. But if that's just a factual disagreement, it's a factual disagreement. But anyway,
they're not going to give up their mind on it. They, of course not. But that doesn't mean that it's been in their control since. They lost part of it in the 70s. But no, they've been in a state of war since 1967 over that.
Oh, yeah, hang on.
It just gives Israel a reason for them to cheer on Syria. To cheer on the Saudi and Austin. One of
the big reasons as to why I don't think there is like a lot, because your whole thing is that, look, it looks like this, but actually underneath there's like a larger like greater Israel plan. There are pretty obvious constraints on that though, right? Because to the south that's not
the whole thing.
Right, but like they've got a hard border with Egypt on the south. Lebanon is very close on the north. that like Jordan is to the west. Like, granted, there is the West Bank between Israel and Jordan, but the point is that there's actually not that, Israel can't be that much greater in a way, right? Like, the only thing they could take is bits of Syria, which I think there would be strong geopolitical consequences. I don't, for example, think that Israel's keen to get into a war with ISIS anytime soon. And so that they have geopolitical reasons why the rest of the world wouldn't want them to be too expansionist, and so that's why I don't think they'll be behaving in that way. I will admit that the weird part is all of these bloody settlements, right? Like that is what gives the distinct impression of a greater Israel plan. But look, at the end of the day, Israel has priorities, and as you've noted, the whole population plan, it's not working. Right, like Israel had no chance of becoming as great a population as Palestinian Arabs do. It's just not. It's not going to happen. And as you've noted, they're not even close now, and they're already having problems feeding a larger population. So it's not going to work. So given that it is impossible for the Jewish to outnumber the Arab Palestinians, they cannot allow a one-state solution where they are living together, right? Because if they're living together in a democracy, the Palestinians will outnumber them, and that's that. And the Israelis are invested in their democracy, in the Knesset and everything, right? Like that's one of their proudest traditions. That's one of the things which they use, as the narrative to say that, listen, we're the good guys here. We're the democracy. We vote on everything, right? So they are, so. The democracy isn't going away. The Knesset's not going away, and the idea so they cannot allow Palestinian Arabs to live in a one state with them. Now, the reason which this has prevented the one state solution is because of Jerusalem, right? Because like Israel actually considers Jerusalem to be their capital city, right? And the Palestinians insist on a right of return to Israel. A right of return to Jerusalem because of the holy sites, which means that like you've got this is where the stumbling block happens, right? Where these interests are mutually exclusive. You can't have a capital city which another state's citizens have the right to return to, because if they have the right to return and live there, then they're citizens. And then if they're citizens, they can vote. And so do you see where the problem is, right? Like so that's where the stickling point is. Now, I think the solution to this will inevitably be something along the lines of, and I don't know which one of these will work, but I think it's inevitable. Either the UN has it as like a UN administrated zone, which both parties can visit to, but people living there, they don't necessarily vote for Israel. Maybe they just have like citizenship of either one, or perhaps Israel takes it, because Israel's in a powerful position. Israel takes it and allows, for example, like permanent non-voting visitors visas or something like that, and that will largely, So that'll be awkward because I imagine that the rights of Palestinians in Jerusalem will be hurt by that, because if they're not citizens, then it'll kind of have that apartheid state ring to it. So I don't know how Israel will cope with that geopolitically, and they don't like to be called an apartheid state, by the way. Like they have rejected apartheid policies in the past because of that sort of criticism. So I don't know how likely that is either. But I reckon the solution is more going to be in Jerusalem than it is going to be over the whole thing, because ultimately, at the end of the day, Israel just wants a state where the Jews are the majority of the population. That's why they've agreed on previous border agreements in the past, which wasn't all of the West Bank and stuff like that. I'll toss back to you quickly. I'm just also googling the Golan Heights thing to check, but over to you.
Okay, so this idea that they're not expanding territory, who have they been in war with? They've been at war with Lebanon. They've been at war with Syria. They were at war with Jordan. They're not in war with Jordan anymore because we paid them off, and Jordan still controls the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Jimmy Carter paid off Egypt. We control Egypt now. But they don't. The land that is we both say the land in Egypt wasn't inhabitable anyway, so it's not really a thing. And of course, they have annexed the Golan Heights and do have an interest in that regard, because they've been at war since 1967, and they even lost part. Yeah, they did. They lost part of it in the 70s, actually. The settlements, they're just part of this outcome, because the outcome that they want, that they foresee, because only 18% of them actually believe that it will be two states. So the outcome that they want is to just go there and settle the same way that settlers did in the United States, in the same way that people out in the United States had disagreements over that, and then
this is
Monroe Doctrine.
This is actually a good analogy, because you're talking about the way in which the United States was settled. So I don't know the exact numbers between Native American populations and settling Americans, but either the settling Americans were just higher in numbers to begin with, or there was the mass slaughter of Native Americans in order to even that out, right? Because Native Americans are a minority in America. So are you suggesting that the Palestinians will be like slaughtered en masse in order to make this work?
I don't know what you're getting at, but as I already said, though, they do have a document that says that they can push all the Palestinians out of the West Bank, and of course they did that with the Green Zone in 1948.
Yeah, but do you think
so it's possible?
But do you think they would? Like, because for example,
it's probable, but possible.
Like, just imagine probable, what that would look like.
Possible, yes.
Yeah, but just have a think of, like, I don't even think it's probable or possible, because, like, think about the way
the document exists. I can show it to you.
Yeah. But like, a document doesn't mean that a state will actually follow out in action. Like Iran, for example, has many documents which say that they're going to write Israel off the map. Does that mean they're actually going to
invade? If they can build nuclear weapons and accuse Iran of building nuclear weapons in secret, and they do that, well, I mean, why do they have the nuclear weapons? Why do they have a lobby? What's the point of having a lobby? What's the point of all these things? It's because there's another agenda.
Well, it's to do with it. Well, it's because basically the geopolitical situation of the world is that if you don't have nuclear weapons, then there's no guarantee that people won't wipe you out. So nuclear weapons, and you're gonna to my knowledge, have never been used for expansionist purposes. Like they've been used once in a war, but then the US didn't invade Japan, like and take over. Do you know what I mean? So like nuclear weapons are more of a, if you try and wipe us out.
The people in Japan don't think so. I had a Japanese professor in college. He would tell me about how the first thing that the U.S. did when they took over was take all their military power away. So they were dependent on the U.S., and that's a big deal to the Japanese, because there was a time you couldn't even land there. They just kill you.
Yeah, but the Japanese.
So they don't feel that way about it at all.
But like the Japanese aren't annexed by the US. Like, they're an independent democracy. They've been voting on getting their military back, and the US hasn't attempted to stop them. Like, so I get that in the aftermath of the war, yeah, there would have been some anti-US sentiment, obviously. But like now, there's not. So, but the point that they're getting a bit sidetracked. The point is that it is the idea that Israel having nuclear weapons is evidence of an expansionist policy. It would be completely outside the norm, because nuclear weapons have never been used for an expansionist purpose in the past.
It's defensive. It's not offensive. It's good. Defensive. It's not offensive.
I agree. So then what I'm saying is that I highly doubt that Israel would want to drive out all of the Palestinians, because that's offensive. It's not defensive. And it has.
Well, Noam Chomsky said in the worst case scenario they would do that the other day. Actually, just 2 days ago, that was his big headline that he made when he was talking about this. Is he said that if there was a right of return, that they would use the weapons.
Yeah. Yep. So
I mean, I don't think that it's totally impossible.
Well, yeah, but like, people grandstand like that all the time. Like, for example, Iran frequently grandstands in their Quds and things that they're going to, wipe Israel off the face of the earth. Are they actually going to do that?
They don't say that.
Really?
They can already attack them if they want to. They already have plenty of missiles. They don't need a nuclear weapon. If they had, I don't think they are building a nuclear weapon, but if they are, it would be, in their case, it would be defensive as well, because Israel has nuclear weapons. Just like Assad, he has very basic chemical weapons. It's just mustard gas, but his neighbor who he's at war with has nuclear weapons, so he has to have something he can fling back over them.
Obviously, this isn't representative, but I've spoken with Iranians before. And they believe that the whole Israel thing is just a kind of like a Western plot to take over the Middle East. So there are absolutely Iranians who believe that Israel does not deserve to be around. Like Hezbollah at one stage, their flag was a mushroom cloud.
Is that all Iranians?
Pardon? No, it's not. But my point is that No, it's not. But my point is, I'm pretty sure you can look to to the sorts of things Hezbollah says, and they don't think Israel deserves to exist. And you can, for example, the wars.
Hezbollah is defensive as well.
Pardon? Because
Hezbollah is
they
defensive.
started the war, right? Like when Israel was first declared.
They didn't start the war. They're named after a massacre of a Lebanese village. They didn't start any war.
So just to be clear,
as far as these wars, is who you ask.
Okay, no, okay, but
anyway,
hang on. I just want to ask this quickly, right? All of the Arab armies which marched on Israel, was there? So you're saying their intention wasn't to defeat them; they were just doing it for what reason?
I'm not trying to assume an outcome. They're defensive. The reason that they were formed, they're named after the massacre of a Lebanese village. I'm not saying everything they did was ever right, or they never launched an offensive attack. I don't know what attack or what you're referring to, but the idea is that they will not allow Israel to invade Lebanon because that's what they keep trying to do.
Right. No. So
that's why it's defensive.
So, but my point is that the original wars against Israel were not to do with don't invade Lebanon again. Otherwise, there just would have been troops stationed at that point in Lebanon. It was to get Israel off the map, and there have been Iranian people in government and in state-sponsored television who frequently telegraph those outcomes. That doesn't actually mean they're going to follow through in the end, right? Because obviously they know that they would probably lose that conflict, that a lot of Iranians would die, that geopolitically it's not feasible. So pointing to individual Jewish actors who have said at one point, well, we'll just drive them all out if worst comes to worst, isn't evidence that's actually going to pass in a parliament, right? Because the Knesset's pretty, like for example, you're saying Israel's moving further right. The Likud party doesn't have an absolute majority. The Knesset is always built up of coalitions with many different Israeli parties, all of whom are not extremely right-wing. Like there's, and also the fact that it's it's partially a religious state means that there are religious, more kind of Torah fundamentalist parties, and then there's also leftist parties in Israel and lots of pragmatic parties. So there isn't if Israel wanted to do this, they just don't have the numbers in the Knesset because it's always been a coalition. The Likud party doesn't have a majority. So yeah, that's just not going to happen.
I'm not sure what you're getting at there, but one thing that I wanted to say was that I think this is what I was talking. I know we were talking about this before. Is the Navajo Nation here? This looks like the Navajo Nation or an Indian reservation. Not that there's a perfect analogy, but I was watching this television program. Where it's like cops, but they're the Navajo cops, and it tells you all about the Navajo Nation and how it's land. They have this land that's it's in between 3 states, and they police it and they have their own government outside of rules. But the thing is that they can vote in elections, and as of 1924, and the Palestinians couldn't. So I'm not saying that. As far as one state goes, we need to really drop this idea that because this is the problem. We need to drop this idea that these two people cannot live together because that's a my state.
No, hang on. This is the question which you haven't answered. This is the question which you haven't answered though. We both agree that the Jewish state wants to actually be majority Jewish. How can they have one state when they don't have the numbers?
But we are in total agreement. I'm saying that's the problem here. That's why it's not a true democracy. That's why this stuff's going on within their borders. We totally agree on that. I'm saying that the outcome that they want, that 82% of their population believes in, thinks is what they think is actually going to happen. Is that eventually the Jewish people will outnumber them, and when it gets to 72%, that's their magic number. Actually, 72%, then they will annex the territories and call it a democracy.
Okay, all right.
That's their plan.
So your contention is that the Jewish will continue to outbreed and outnumber the Palestinian Arabs up until they are a majority, and then they'll do the one state. Okay.
Yeah.
In theory, that solves the main problem, which in my mind prevents them from being one state, which is the population. I just don't think they're ever going to reach those populations parity. because currently, let's appreciate this. Currently, the Palestinian Arabs are the majority by a lot, right? And you're now saying that the Jews' plan is to outnumber them 3-1. So to go from the minority to a 3-1 majority, right, seems insane. I like, and as you already noted, they can't feed them now. How on earth is that going to work?
It worked here in the United States, and it's not. I mean, this is what they actually want. This is what it looks like in their borders now. They actually have about 80 to 20%, and within the proper green zone, within what you would call the Jewish territory, the Israeli territory, it's 80 to 20%. That's the number that they want. So they're shooting for 72%. This is what my sources say. That's why I say that number. It makes sense to me because that's the number that they have within the borders that they're declaring already.
Yeah. So when you said it worked in the United States, it's not like the British settlers bred up until they outnumbered the Native Americans and went in. No, they just killed them. You know what I mean? And they were.
I'm actually talking about slaves.
Pardon?
I'm actually talking about the indigenous slave population.
Yeah. But wait, hang on. Yeah, so you mean the Native Americans? Yeah, like the Native Americans.
No, the slaves were mostly African Americans.
Oh, sorry, the African Americans.
I'm talking about
the
black slavery.
The African American population is only like 10% or 14% of the United States.
But I'm saying their outcome, the way that we dealt with slavery, that we gave them freedom, but they were still second-class citizens through Jim Crow laws, and then we got rid of the Jim Crow laws. So this is a long process. We can't assume an outcome. We can just say that you call yourself a democracy. You're not. You need to be a democracy. They have a military occupation. What are the Palestinians? I mean, what's their zone in the West Bank going to be? Area C?
Okay.
What's the problem in the West Bank? It's checkpoints. If it's one state, there's no more checkpoints. And the PLO
negotiated. I just address this thing about the United States, right? It's not like the African American population prior to Jim Crow outnumbered the white population in the United States, right? And then the white population just outbred them. That didn't happen. They were always a minority, right? Like the white population was always in.
They didn't have a goal though. They never wanted to be. They never wanted that outcome to begin with. The only thing they wanted was, hey, can I not be a slave anymore? Like John Locke says, all men.
But that's why this is disanalogous, because we've agreed that a precondition for democracy is that the Jewish population outnumber the Palestinians. Now, I've actually looked up the numbers. Okay, here are the current populations. The Palestinian population is 4.5 million. The Israeli population is 8.5 million, and the Gaza Strip population is 1.86 million. Oh, hang on a moment. That means that Israel's majority. What's going on? Oh, well, it's not 80.
It's pretty much split evenly between river to sea.
Yeah. It's not the 80% they're looking for. So you would need Israel.
That's my point.
Yeah, you'd need Israel's population to increase by what, like 30% or something, or 20, or like you need like 2 more million Jews. Do you reckon?
It's their goal. I'm not saying that it's that they're making realistic goals here. Right. I think if the numbers that I have say that they want it to even out by 2030, and they can't do that. So we're probably going to look into 2050 next.
Yeah. Okay. So actually, we actually kind of agree. Basically, if it's possible for them to expand their population, then they'll probably go for one state. If it's not possible, then they won't. And we've talked about some like agricultural limits and stuff, but who knows? Maybe they'll overcome them. But we actually agree then. It all just depends on if they can achieve that population. Hey, Julian, we did it.
Yeah, we just have 1 minute left. I think we do pretty much agree for the most part. It's just that the more that I debate this and study it, I just don't think that it's 2 states are a viable outcome. I think that the expectation of that is a problem, and we need to identify it as such.
For me, I just think the number one priority is the majority Jewish state, which means that 2 states is off the table if they can't outnumber them by that that amount you were talking about. And yeah, look, if you think it's possible for them to generate like, you know, another 20 or 30% of their population, then you agree with Julian. If you don't, you agree with me. But I don't think that either of us can really know at this stage.
I didn't say that it was possible. The numbers that I have, it's not possible, but it's the outcome that they want, and it's the outcome